today's video I'm going to be talking about rhythm, which I'm told is quite an important part of music. And it's not so much about feel and groove, which is obviously important, but this is more about ways of getting more interesting rhythmic ideas into your playing, whether it's your rhythm guitar playing or your lead playing and soloing. And a lot of players that I listen to are a little bit boring and conservative when it comes to rhythms, and I'm guilty of this myself, though I hope less so these days since I started working on the kind of ideas that I'm going to talk about in this video. But I think you find that you might not even be aware of this. I think guitar players' minds are often elsewhere. They're thinking about technique and the perceived difficulty of something, and rhythmic ideas are really just something they do unconsciously. You might not even be aware that you're falling into certain habits and cliches and kind of always doing things the same kind of way rhythmically. So what I've got in this video is a series of strategies which I've found helpful to bring more interesting rhythmic ideas into my own playing, and it's not meant to be exhaustive, it's just a few things that I found useful. If you've got any favourite rhythmic ideas or strategies that you'd like to share in the comments, then I'll be interested to read about them. But let's get started with idea number one. This is perhaps going to seem like quite an obvious one, but it's so important to vary where you start your phrases in terms of the rhythm, and this is where so many players just fall into habits of always starting their phrases in the same kind of a way. And quite a good experiment to do might be to record yourself playing a solo for a minute or two and then listen back and listen to each phrase and make a note of whereabouts you're starting, rhythmically speaking. And then you're going to notice the kind of rhythmic habits and perhaps cliches that you tend to fall into. And a lot of players tend to start their phrases in very obvious places, so right on beat one of the bar, or else just on one of the other strong beats. And in fact, you've got so many more options when it comes to starting your phrases and making them a bit more memorable and unpredictable rhythmically. And once you're aware of those habits, you can start doing something about them. So perhaps you might like to try coming in a little bit later in the bar. So maybe come in on the and of one instead of on the one. So 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. 2, 3, 4, 1. Or you could perhaps come in before that downbeat and have some notes serving as kind of pickup notes. So maybe coming in on the and of 2, perhaps leading to the 1 of the next bar. So 1 and 2. 3, 4, 1 and 2. Already things are starting to sound a little bit more interesting. And a good exercise that I think I've mentioned previously on this channel would be to take the same phrase, a very simple phrase, and see if you can start it on all of the 8th note subdivisions of the beat. So start by beginning your phrase on beat 1 and then on the and of 1, 2, the and of 2, all the way through the bar. And you'll start to see how much mileage you can get out of a very simple phrase just by varying where you start on the beat. Let me just demonstrate that exercise then. I'm going to take a very simple 5-note phrase and I'm going to play along to my backing track, and I'm gradually going to move that phrase through the bar to all of the possible 8th note starting points. Think about some simple syncopation, which is a great way of adding some more rhythmic interest to your playing, and an easy way of getting into that might be to use some rhythmic pushes. And this is just a term that refers to emphasizing usually the and of 4, so you can use this in your lead guitar playing. It's very frequently used in rhythm guitar playing, so when you're writing songs or riffs you can try changing chords on the and of 4 and it just gives everything a nice bit of momentum. So in the backing track that I was playing over just now, it's based on a 4-chord progression in A minor. So we've got A, G, C, and F. And to make that chord progression a bit more interesting, I was pushing into every other chord. So when I was going from the A to the G, I was changing on the and of 4, and likewise going from the C to the F, I was changing on the and of 4. So you've got this kind of thing: 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. So it's a great thing to try in chord progressions in riffs. You can do it in lead guitar playing as well, just emphasizing that and of 4. So one of my favourite examples of this kind of thing in pushes is the Thin Lizzy classic, The Boys Are Back in Town. I think almost every chord in that is on the push, and it gives the whole track this great kind of energy and momentum. So it's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, 2, 3, 4. It's usually a good idea to mix up your note values and not to fall into that trap of just playing very predictable 8th note rhythms, for example. I mean, if we just take one bar of music, you've got so many options in terms of the note length and how you subdivide that bar of music. So it could go from playing whole notes, which last for the entire bar, so 1, 2, 3, 4. You could divide that into half notes, 2 beats each. Play on every beat for quarter notes, or 8th notes, or maybe triplets, or 16th notes. And you could even go on subdividing and get into some more unusual kind of rhythmic subdivisions, quintuplets and so on. And you want to get a feel for all of those different rhythmic subdivisions, and often in the course of an improvisation, a solo, you want to mix up your note values a little bit so it's not so predictable. And the same goes of course with rhythm guitar, with riff writing. If you listen to some, you know, the greatest riffs, Led Zeppelin riffs for example, they're not necessarily just going to be even 8th notes. You can throw triplets in there, throw some rests in there, they've got syncopation, you've got all kinds of rhythmic options. It doesn't have to be boring. So just as an example, I'm going to play along to my backing track once again, and I'm going to start with whole notes, and then I'm going to play half notes, and then keep on subdividing just so you can hear how it works in context. You can do this with a backing track, you can do it with a metronome, but just get used to those basic rhythmic subdivisions so you can feel them, and then in time you can move between them. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to keep things very simple, maybe just play some notes from the A minor pentatonic scale. Another thing that I often like to do is to use rests to create some syncopation and rhythmic displacements. So a simple example might be this: if you just take a 4-note phrase, so maybe just descending the A minor pentatonic scale, you can play those notes as 8th notes, 1 and 2, and then I'm going to leave an 8th note rest and then repeat the phrase. And what you find is that that 4-note phrase is now happening in different parts of the beat. It's displaced and it creates some quite interesting rhythmic effects. So we've got 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and... So just playing the same 4 notes, if you just played that very squarely against the beat, it would be very boring. But with this rhythmic displacement effect, it actually becomes quite interesting. So I'm just going to demonstrate that along to the backing track, and you could just play a pentatonic sequence, maybe those 4 notes, but just going down or up the scale, and you'll be able to hear that displacement effect happening. Is related to rhythmic subdivisions, and it's the idea that sometimes it can be cool to go against the natural rhythmic feel of a track. So depending on the context, it will usually have a subdivision that feels very natural. So in my backing track, it's very much an 8th note feeling. You've got the drums and the synth bass line playing 8th notes. So that would be the natural rhythm to play if you were kind of riffing or soloing over that track. So perhaps you might choose to go against that and maybe play triplets. It can be a little bit difficult to feel those rhythms against the track, which kind of doesn't give you that feeling, but it can create a really nice tension. And the opposite can also work. If you've got, say, a swinging jazz or blues track, maybe try playing some straight 8th notes or 16th notes against that swing feel. And again, it's a good way of generating rhythmic interest and tension. One rhythm that I do enjoy using is quarter note triplets. And this perhaps is a slightly unloved, underutilized rhythm, but I really like the kind of lazy feel it gives to your phrasing. It's something that I use quite a lot. So what is a quarter note triplet? I think the starting point should be the regular 8th note triplet. I think most of you will know what that is or be able to feel it, and that's where you divide each beat up into 3 subdivisions. So you've got that kind of 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a... So dividing each beat up into 3 subdivisions. A quarter note triplet is a similar kind of idea, but this time we're taking 2 beats and we're dividing that up into 3. So placing 3 notes in the space of 2. And this can be quite a tricky rhythm to feel and to count. The best way to come at it for me is to start with the regular triplets and then just play every other note of the regular 8th note triplets. If I try and show you what I mean. If we start with our triplets, just playing those on an A note here, 10th fret on the B string, alternate strokes of the pick, 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a... Then if we just play every other note of that triplet, and what that means in terms of technique is we're going to be missing out the upstrokes, then you're going to have a quarter note triplet rhythm. So just to emphasize that, you could play a bar of triplets, a bar of 8th note triplets, then a bar of quarter note triplets, and you'll really be able to hear the distinction between those 2 rhythms. So 2, 3, 4. So very cool rhythm. I think I'm just going to play that rhythm against my backing track, and maybe I'll play a little pentatonic phrase where I'm going between 8th note and quarter note triplets. One final thing you might like to play around with is playing very freely and not feeling like you always need to be grooving and locked in with the track. And obviously you don't want to overdo this, or it's just going to sound like you don't know what you're doing and you can't play in time. But I think it can be very effective if you just do a little bit of this and then kind of come back inside and back in time, and that contrast can be really interesting. And often I do this with fast notes. There'll be a little flurry of notes. I'm not conscious of playing 16th notes or triplets or anything like that. I'm just playing these notes, squeezing them in, being a bit flexible with the time, and then at the end of the phrase usually I'm going to want to resolve into the groove and onto the beat. And you can also think of it in terms of slowing down or speeding up. So if you're playing in the groove and you just kind of slow down and let the notes stretch out a little bit, or you could go in the opposite direction and just try and cram in some more notes, and then you get that feeling of things just kind of floating out of time just momentarily, and I think it can be very effective. And there are other perhaps more intellectual ways that you can access these unusual rhythms, so you can get into unusual subdivisions, polyrhythms, tuplets, all of this kind of stuff, which can be very interesting. It's not somewhere I usually go in my own playing, but I do find that it's just kind of playing a little bit out of time deliberately, you can get a similar kind of effect, and it's less kind of a mental effort to get there. And that's it for this video. I've tabbed out quite a few of the examples I've been discussing. You can find that tab on the Patreon page along with my backing track. Thanks very much for watching. See you next time.